Imagine it's 1st October 2008. You are a 42-year-old stationery shop owner living in Akita City, Japan. Your store sits under your apartment with neat rows of notebooks, pens, and school bags facing a street you have known since childhood. You keep your savings in a postal bank account, your wife handles the books after dinner, and every April you count on the rush of parents buying supplies for the new school year. Your son has already left for Tokyo, but your daughter still walks to the local elementary school with a bright yellow cap and a backpack almost too large for her shoulders. Most mornings begin the same way. Metal shutter up, kettle on, cash drawer checked, delivery slips stacked beside the register. Nothing feels broken, and that is exactly why the danger is so hard to see. If you have ever wondered why rich countries can look stable on the surface while something vital is draining out underneath them, stay with me. What you are about to hear is not a theory. It is a pattern. It has happened before in different places, under different governments, and it leaves the same marks every time. And if you find value in this kind of historical clarity, subscribing takes 2 seconds and keeps you ahead of what most people never see coming. Later that day, the numbers come out. Japan's total population, according to official estimates, has fallen to 127.692 million. It is only a small drop from the year before, just 79,000 people, barely enough to feel in a city the size of Tokyo. But in towns like yours, it lands like a whisper inside an empty church. The share of Japanese people aged 65 and over has reached 22.1%. The share of children has kept shrinking. A nation that built railways, shipyards, car plants, and one of the richest middle classes on earth has begun to run short of the one thing every economy quietly depends on: future people. Not customers tomorrow, not taxpayers 20 years from now. Not nurses, builders, teachers, soldiers, and parents. People. That is what this video is really about. Not panic, not prophecy. A pattern. The pattern is demographic collapse, which means a society is having too few children for too long, while people live longer and the population grows older. And when that happens in a rich country, the damage does not arrive like an explosion. It arrives like snow on a roof. Light at first, then heavier. Then all at once, beams that looked strong begin to bend. Before we go further, there is something important to understand. An economy is not just money moving on screens. It is an agreement between generations. Workers today support children below them and retirees above them, while trusting that younger workers will one day do the same for them. When that chain weakens, the problem is not only that there are fewer babies. The real problem is that every school, business, tax system, housing market, hospital, and pension plan was built for a different shape of society. Think of a fruit orchard. A healthy orchard has young trees, mature trees, and old trees. If you stop planting for many years, the orchard can still look fine for a while. The old trees keep standing. Fruit still appears. The books may even look good. But underneath, the future harvest has already been cut. By the time the owner feels the loss, the missing trees should have been growing for years. Demographic collapse works the same way. It hides in the delay. The child not born in 2005 is the worker missing in 2030, the taxpayer missing in 2045, the home buyer missing in 2055. That is why rich nations ignore it. Wealth acts like painkiller. Debt can fund pensions for a while. Immigration can slow the fall for a while. Automation can squeeze more output from fewer workers for a while. Capital cities can keep booming and make the national story look better than it is, but the missing people are still missing. The cracks do not vanish, they travel. Japan shows this better than almost anywhere else. In 2008, when the country first registered a small overall population decline after years of warning signs, the change looked manageable. Japan was still advanced, still orderly, still full of savings, still exporting cars and machines to the world. But the demographic engine was already reversing. In 2008, the official child population was 17,176 million, just 13.5% of the country. By 2024, Japan's total population had fallen to 123,802 million, down 550,000 in a single year, and the share of people aged 65 and over had climbed to 29.3%. In 2023, births fell to 758,731. In 2024, they fell again to 720,988. In 2023, marriages even slipped below 500,000 for the first time in 90 years. Those are not just numbers. They are empty desks, closed maternity wards, and streets where the shutters stay down longer each year. Look closely at what ordinary people lived through. In big cities, especially Tokyo, the machine still hummed. Jobs concentrated there. Young people kept arriving. But outside the core, especially in places like Akita, Aomori, and many rural prefectures, the pattern was different. Schools merged. Bus routes became thinner. Small shops lost the young families who bought school uniforms, birthday cakes, and starter homes. Elderly parents stayed behind in houses their children did not want or could not return to. A shrinking town is like a fireplace that still has heat near the center while the edges go cold first. By the time the people in the middle notice, the frost has already reached the walls. Now here's where it gets interesting. Japan's problem was never just that there were more elderly people. Longer life is a success. The real mechanism was that the number of people in the productive ages, meaning the years when most people work and pay the largest share of taxes, kept falling while the obligations kept growing. More health care, more elder care, more pension payments, fewer workers to fund them. That forces hard choices. Taxes rise, benefits are squeezed, retirement ages move, government borrows more, families provide more unpaid care, businesses struggle to hire. In that kind of economy, growth starts to feel like running uphill in wet sand. You are moving. But each step costs more than it used to. Japan also offers a fact most people miss. Demographic decline does not mean every asset falls together. In fact, the opposite often happens. Prime property in strong cities can hold up or even rise because the remaining demand becomes more concentrated. Meanwhile, homes in weak regions can wither like boats left on a dry riverbed, so the national map splits. One country on paper. Two economies in practice. That split matters because it fools politicians. If Tokyo looks lively, they can pretend the nation still has time. But demographic collapse rarely attacks the capital first. It eats the margins first. The center hears it later. And this brings us directly to a second lesson. Demographic collapse is not always slow. Sometimes it arrives like a trapdoor. That matters because demographic shocks are rarely caused by biology alone. People do not open a calendar, see a lower national birth rate, and change their lives. They react to risk. When work becomes uncertain, when old rules vanish, when housing or childcare becomes unstable, the mind does something defensive. It stops making long commitments. Marriage gets postponed. First children get postponed. Second children disappear. In statistics, this looks abstract. In life, it is simple. A couple sits at a kitchen table, looks at rent, looks at work, looks at the future, and says, not yet. Not. Then millions of not yets become a national event. This is one reason the subject is so often misunderstood. Governments love to count births after the fact. History shows the deeper clue is confidence before the fact. You can see it in hiring, in migration, in how many homes young adults dare to rent or buy, in whether grandparents are expected to carry the care burden, and in whether women believe motherhood will cost them their ladder at work. When the future narrows, the cradle empties. Here is something I want you to think about before we go further. If a society suddenly loses faith in the future, what disappears first? Jobs, marriages, home prices, or births? Drop your answer in the comments. Seriously. Because what I am about to show you next is the part of this story that most people never hear. And it changes everything. After German reunification in 1990, East Germany became one of the clearest demographic shock zones in modern European history. The Berlin Wall was gone. The flags changed. The money changed. The whole future changed. On paper, this was liberation and opportunity. In real life, for many young adults, it also meant deep uncertainty. Old workplaces disappeared, state industries collapsed, career paths vanished. The rules that had organized daily life were ripped out almost overnight. And when people stop trusting the ground under their feet, they delay the most irreversible choice of all, bringing a child into the world. The numbers were staggering. Research on East Germany shows that births fell from about 200,000 in 1989 to about 80,000 in 1994, a drop of roughly 60% in 5 years. The crude birth rate, which means births per 1,000 people, fell from 12.0 in 1989 to 5.1 in 1994. Between 1990 and 1991 alone, the total fertility rate, meaning the average number of children a woman would have over her lifetime, dropped about 40%, from just under 1.5 to about 0.9. Some estimates put the low point around 0.77 in 1993 and 1994. That was not a gentle decline. That was the demographic equivalent of a heart monitor falling off a table. What did this feel like on the ground? It meant young women and men looked at their wages, their housing, their job security, and their new world, and decided to wait. It meant daycare centers built for a previous generation had too few children. It meant apartment blocks lost young tenants first. It meant villages and industrial towns lost not just workers, but the next class of parents. In later years, millions moved west in search of better prospects, and the East was left older, emptier, and more male in some areas because young women were especially likely to leave. A society can survive many things, but when its daughters pack first, the future leaves with them. This case matters because it reveals something brutal. You do not need poverty on the level of a failed state for demographic collapse to hit. You only need prolonged uncertainty. People do not have children because officials tell them the macroeconomic picture, meaning the big national picture, is improving. They have children when the future feels livable, when work is stable, when housing is not absurd, when care is possible, when the next 10 years can be imagined without fear. East Germany showed that once that confidence snaps, births can fall faster than almost any government can respond. Demography is less like a faucet than a forest. You cannot turn it back on instantly. You have to wait for growth. This leads to the second part of this story, and it is quieter, slower, and in some ways more dangerous because it looks normal. Italy did not experience the sudden regime shock of East Germany. It experienced something more familiar to many rich democracies, a long squeeze. Over time, wages lagged, housing costs bit harder, childcare stayed patchy, and the age balance tilted upward until the whole structure started to groan. If Japan is the slow leak, and East Germany is the trapdoor, Italy is the house whose upstairs keeps getting heavier while the downstairs empties room by room. By 2024, Italy recorded 370,000 births, the lowest figure since the country's unification in 1861. That was the 16th straight annual drop. Births were 35.8% lower than in 2008, the last year Italy saw an increase. The fertility rate fell to 1.18, a record low. Since 2014, Italy's population has shrunk by almost 1.9 million people. In 2024 alone, deaths exceeded births by about 281,000. Nearly 1 in 4 residents was over 65. And public pension spending stood at about 16% of GDP, which means roughly 16 cents out of every euro produced in the economy went to public pensions. That is a very heavy backpack for a workforce that is already thinning. But statistics only show the skeleton. The flesh of the story is everyday life. The BBC recently reported from northern Italy on parents struggling with exactly the kinds of problems economists like to hide inside spreadsheets. A mother named Valentina described how hard it was to find affordable childcare. Not many babies, she said, but not many kindergarten places either. Schools did not always run into the afternoon, which made full-time work harder. Summer holidays stretched for 3 months, turning ordinary employment into a logistical maze. Money helped a little. Monthly checks existed, but what families needed was practical support: hours, childcare, transport, predictability. A birth rate can collapse because people hate children. More often, it collapses because the daily math stops working. And this is where history gets uncomfortable. An aging society does not only spend more on the old, it often spends in ways that make it harder for the young to form families. The budget leans toward pensions and healthcare. Local politics leans toward retirees because retirees vote more consistently. Housing is often owned by older generations. Young adults wait longer to leave home, marry later, and have fewer children. The society becomes like a ladder where the top rungs grow crowded, while the bottom rungs pull farther apart. Nobody chooses the overall pattern. Each family simply adapts. But millions of private adaptations create one public outcome. Italy also shows how migration helps and does not help. Foreign residents made up 9.2% of the population in 2024, and without immigration, Italy's decline would have been worse and earlier. The United Nations says migration can attenuate decline, which means soften it in countries such as Italy and Germany, but it also says migration cannot fully offset population decline or population aging in the long run. That is one of the biggest counterintuitive facts in this whole story. Immigration can buy time. It cannot manufacture a missing age structure forever. If the orchard has not been replanted, bringing in fruit from next door helps with dinner. It does not regrow the trees. Look at what happened in Italy's towns and smaller provinces. When births fall for 16 years in a row, time itself starts to lose balance. A nursery closes, then the school bus route is cut, then the bakery beside the school loses half its morning trade. A mayor offers cash bonuses for births or free nursery places, not because local officials suddenly became romantics, but because they can see the tax base thinning in real time. In 2024, Italy also recorded 191,000 citizens moving abroad, the highest number this century under the official count. That matters because demographic decline is hardest when low births combine with outward migration. It is not just fewer babies, it is fewer 20-somethings, fewer apprentices, fewer future parents, and fewer people to inherit and maintain the places left behind. There is a strange illusion in aging countries. Life expectancy rises. Italy's reached 83.4 years in 2024. The number of centenarians, people aged 100 or more, rose to a record 23,500. Those facts sound like national success, and in one sense they are. People are living longer, But if longevity rises while family formation keeps weakening, success at the top of the age ladder collides with emptiness at the bottom. The pyramid turns into a column, stable for a moment, then hard to support. A society can celebrate longer lives and still face a fiscal squeeze, which means public money being stretched tighter each year, because more years of retirement need to be financed by fewer years of work from a smaller base of workers. That is the quiet cruelty of this pattern. One triumph creates a new pressure, because another part of the system failed to renew. By now, the pattern should be coming into focus. Japan shows the long, rich country drift. East Germany shows how fast birth rates can collapse when certainty vanishes. Italy shows how ordinary pressures can grind family formation down year after year without a dramatic headline. Different maps, different languages, same gravity. Most people will never know what you now know. Most people will keep trusting systems they do not understand because the lights are still on and the stores are still open. If you are still here, you are not most people. Hit subscribe, because the next section is the part this channel was made for, the part they never put in textbooks. Now observe what all of these cases have in common. The same mechanism. Different countries, different decades, same result. First, births fall below replacement, which means below the level needed for one generation to replace itself, usually about 2.1 children per woman in rich countries. Then the missing children become missing students. Then they become missing apprentices, missing recruits, missing homebuyers, missing taxpayers. At first, the losses are hidden because older generations are large and still working, saving, and spending. But eventually the center of gravity shifts. The society has more claimants than builders, more receipts to pay than hands to earn them, more rooms to heat than children to fill them. The United Nations now says more than half of all countries and territories in the world have fertility below replacement. Nearly 1/5 are in what it calls ultra-low fertility, meaning fewer than 1.4 births per woman. That matters because once a country stays very low for long enough, the rebound becomes harder. A population is not just a head count. It has an age shape. An age shape is destiny with a long fuse. You can borrow money, you can import labor, you can encourage later retirement, you can build robots. But none of those tools instantly create a missing generation of 25-year-olds. This is why demographic collapse may be the economic bomb rich nations ignore. Not because it explodes loudly, but because it changes every other calculation. Debt becomes harder to carry when the tax base shrinks. Housing markets become unstable when demand concentrates into a few winning cities and drains from the rest. Welfare states become harder to fund. Militaries struggle to recruit. Hospitals struggle to staff. Politics turn sour because every budget feels like a fight between age groups. The river has changed course, but most people are still arguing about the old bridge. There's another uncomfortable truth. Aging itself is not the real enemy. Aging with too few young people is. A country can get older and still function well if productivity, meaning how much each worker can produce, rises fast enough and institutions adapt. But adaptation has to be early, boring, and sustained. Later retirement. Higher female labor participation, which means more women able to stay in paid work if they want to, affordable childcare, housing that does not punish family formation, smart immigration, regional policy that accepts some places will shrink and plans honestly for it. The countries that avoid the worst outcomes are usually the ones willing to redesign the machine before the gears start stripping. Look at what happened next in South Korea, because it shows the human cost in high definition. South Korea is not a poor country trapped in the past. It is one of the most educated, technologically advanced societies on Earth. And yet in 2023, its fertility rate fell to 0.72, down from 0.78 a year earlier. Seoul, the capital with the country's highest housing costs, posted an even lower figure, 0.55. Since 2018, South Korea has been the only OECD country with a fertility rate below 1. The government has spent more than 360 trillion won since 2006 trying to reverse the trend. Still, the population declined for a fourth straight year in 2023, and Reuters reported that the country of about 51 million is on track to halve by the end of this century. But again, the story lives in ordinary decisions. Reuters quoted a 34-year-old junior manager in Seoul named Kwak Tae-hee. She had been married for 3 years. She wanted a baby. She had even considered IVF treatment. But she also knew the windows for promotion in her company were narrow, and she feared being passed over. So she volunteered for work projects instead and delayed. That one choice is deeply personal. It is also structurally rational. When career systems punish mothers, when housing is expensive, when private education costs loom, when workplaces still assume someone else will do the care, the nation should not be surprised when births collapse. It built the incentive map itself. Who gets hurt most in these societies? First, middle-class families in shrinking regions. Their wages are often flat, their children leave, their homes do not hold value like homes in major cities, and the public services around them thin out. Second, small business owners whose customer base ages out in front of them. The barber, the stationery seller, the baker near the school, the local hardware store. Third, women who are told to have more children while being handed systems designed for someone with a full-time unpaid caregiver at home. Fourth, pensioners in places where services disappear faster than benefits rise. A pension check means less if the nearest clinic closes and the bus no longer comes. Collapse is not only about income, it is about access. Who walks away relatively fine? Usually the same groups across countries. Owners of scarce property in globally connected cities, large firms that can automate, recruit internationally, or spread costs across a big market. Workers with portable skills, meaning skills they can take to another city or country. Older professionals who keep earning into their late 60s and 70s. In some cases, even governments in the short run, because older societies can look stable for a while. They save more, they spend less on children, crime can be lower, streets can feel orderly. That surface calm is what makes demographic decline so deceptive. It is like watching a reservoir stay full because the dam gates are closed, while upstream no rain has fallen for years. And notice the moral twist. The people who pay the highest price are often the ones who did nothing reckless. They worked, saved, bought a home, raised a child or two, paid into the system. The damage comes from the surrounding structure. If the town loses half its young adults, your careful household budget cannot make the school stay open. If the region has too few nurses, your prudence cannot staff the care home. If the tax base narrows, your discipline cannot keep every promise generous. That is why demographic collapse is so politically explosive. No single villain exists. No one can be arrested. The missing people do not protest. They were never born. South Korea also reveals another feature rich nations hate to admit. Once fertility falls very low, governments often discover that money alone does not rebuild trust. Subsidies help at the margin, loans help at the margin. But if the work culture stays punishing, if homes near jobs are unaffordable, if private tutoring becomes an arms race, and if care remains uneven, the incentives cancel each other out. The state is pressing the accelerator while the road itself tilts uphill. That is why demographic decline cannot be solved with slogans. It is an ecosystem problem, which means every part affects every other part. Housing, work, transport, schools, elder care, gender norms, migration, even the length of the school day. Miss one gear and the whole clock keeps losing time. At this point, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The question is not whether this pattern will repeat. History has already answered that in different forms, in different countries, again and again. The only question is whether you will see it before it sees you. If this channel helps you think differently about the world you live in, subscribe. It costs nothing, and it might change everything. So what did the survivors do differently? Not the lucky few who guessed every market move, not the politicians who promised miracles. The historical record shows that those who came through periods of demographic strain with the least damage largely shared a few characteristics. First, they were mobile. They were willing to move toward places where jobs, services, and younger populations were still concentrated. In East Germany, cities such as Leipzig and Dresden eventually recovered far better than many remote towns because they gathered universities, firms, culture, and people into denser hubs. In Japan, Tokyo continued to pull in the young even as many prefectures shrank. When the tide goes out, standing in a deep harbor is different from standing on a sandbar. Second, they kept skills current. That sounds dull, but dull things often decide history. In aging economies, labor can become scarce in some fields even while overall growth stays weak. Workers who could adapt to care work, technical fields, logistics, maintenance, or advanced manufacturing had more options. Firms that redesigned work for older employees also held up better. Japan's debate about working later is not glamorous, but it points to a real survival trait. Societies that use 65-year-olds as contributors instead of treating them only as dependents can buy themselves time. Time is precious in a demographic crisis because time is the one thing missing generations cannot provide. Third, the more resilient households avoided building their whole future on one fragile assumption. One salary forever, one town forever, one house price forever, one state promise forever. They diversified, meaning they did not let one local employer, one local property market, or one public payment decide everything. That is not financial advice, it is a historical observation. In shrinking places, concentration becomes dangerous. The economy turns into thin ice. It may hold for years. Then one warm season reveals how little margin was there all along. Societies that handled demographic decline better also tended to do something else. They made it easier, not harder, for adults to combine work and family. This is where the conversation often goes wrong. Governments talk about patriotism. Couples talk about time, rent, childcare, and exhaustion. The second group is usually describing reality. When women are pushed out of work by motherhood, family income falls and the cost of children rises. When childcare is scarce, even people who want a second child hesitate. When housing near jobs is too expensive, people postpone partnership. Rich countries sometimes speak about births as if they were a moral campaign. History suggests they are more often the downstream result of labor policy, housing policy, and time policy. Now bring the story back to Akita. The shopkeeper from the opening scene does not wake up one morning to find his country gone. That is not how demographic collapse works. He notices it in fragments: fewer first graders buying pencils, more funerals than baby gifts, a neighbor's house staying empty after the old owner dies, his daughter graduating and not coming back, his son visiting less often because Tokyo is where the work is. The town still has roads, vending machines, clean trains, and government offices. But the pulse is lighter, like a song played with half the instruments missing. History shows that by the time a rich nation treats demographic collapse as an emergency, much of the outcome is already locked in. The babies not born in 2010 cannot become nurses in 2035 because Parliament passed a speech in 2026. The math moves slowly, but it sets hard limits. That is why this subject matters so much. It touches growth, debt, housing, care, education, military strength, politics, and the everyday feeling of whether a place has a future. Rich nations often ignore it because the pain is delayed and uneven. The capital is fine. The wealthy district is fine. The headline GDP number is not catastrophic. But history does not care about appearances, it cares about structure. And the deepest lesson may be this: demographic collapse is not simply about having fewer people, it is about losing renewal. A society can survive austerity, which means forced spending cuts. It can survive recession, which means the economy shrinking for a time. It can survive even war and rebuild. But when renewal itself weakens, the whole civilization begins living off stored momentum. It burns the furniture to heat the house. Warm for now, colder later. This is historical and educational analysis. It is not financial advice. Every individual situation is different. Please consult a qualified professional before making any financial decision. This video is not for everyone. Most people will dismiss it because the streets in rich countries still look normal, but if one person in your life needs to hear this, share it with them. Not because it will change the world, because it might change their world. Subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one.